All right, so you're a Lightroom user and now you suddenly have access to Photoshop or you're considering Photoshop. Do you need it? Why would you want it? What can Photoshop do that Lightroom can't? I mean, can't you make your photos look great in Lightroom? You can. But there's a lot of great things you can also do in Photoshop. So follow along and see some of these new things, and I'm sure you're going to want to add Photoshop to your workflow. I remember it wasn't that long ago when Lightroom came out, and the big question that people asked was, well, do I really need Lightroom? I'm already using Photoshop. And then Lightroom took off by storm, and now we have people that are using Lightroom and have never used Photoshop. And so there's some photographers that are wondering, hey, I can do so much in Lightroom, and you really can. Do I even need Photoshop anymore? So I've just created this video to show you some of the things that you could do in Photoshop. For those of us who've been using Photoshop for a long time, it's almost a no-brainer. I mean, there's so many things I could say, like layers, channels, masks, filters, the pen tool, all the vector tools. We've got the enhanced brush engine with pressure sensitivity. We can do panoramas, HDRs, time lapses, work with video, 3D. I could just go and list all the things that you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in Lightroom, and that would actually make for a very boring tutorial. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you a few different things that we can do. So if you're new to Photoshop, you're going to enjoy this. If you've been using Photoshop for a while, I'm sure you'll pick up a couple of things here too. And one of the other things to make worth mentioning, it used to be that, if you bought Lightroom, and it used to be, what, $200 or $300 back in the day, and then it eventually dropped down to about 100 and something. And then it was like, Photoshop was $600 or $700. I think it was $1,000 for the extended version. And that was just unreachable for some people. So now that Adobe has the Creative Cloud for photographers, it's $9.99 a month now, and you can get Photoshop and Lightroom and all the updates. So you get all the latest versions of it, plus you get Lightroom Mobile. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So anyway, let's go ahead and have a look here. I'm just going to choose File, Open, and I'm going to show you some things right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these 4 images, and I'm just going to click Open. I'm going to show you how to use reusable templates. So here we go. We've got an image basically as just a background that I made with some brushes and different things like that. And as another thing we can do, I threw some design elements in there. And then these are just some layers that I did, and I also used some custom brushes to grunge these up a little bit. And that's something we do a lot in Photoshop, is we love to use textures and overlay them over the top of things and use brushes and grunge up photos, and it just enables you to create some really cool, more organic looking things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop some photographs in here, and I'm going to show you how this template can be completely reusable. So what I've done is I've opened 4 documents. We can't see them all right now. So we're going to go under Window, and we're just going to go down to the Arrange, and we've got different ways of arranging our windows. We're going to grab 4 up. So there we go. We can see our photos. I'm just going to simply click and drag these photos in there. And I'm just selecting one at a time, dragging it into the window, and now I can close these other ones out because we don't need these anymore. We've got everything here inside this one document. So here's our template, and we've dropped these layers on top. So what we want to do now is we want to actually take these layers and put them inside the boxes. But you may have noticed that these are pretty huge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale them down. I'm going to grab all 3 of these, and I'm going to hit Command T for free transform. And right now you can't see the bounding boxes because it's really big. So if you hit Command 0, this will scale out the document, and you can see all the size. So I'm just going to hold the Shift key, and I'm going to drag these down just so we can kind of make these fit a little bit better. I'm just going to hit Enter to apply these, and I'm going to go back to Command 0, which is just going to make it fill the screen. So now we can go through, we can see we've got the different ones. So why don't we start with, let's have a look at this. The eye icon, by the way, makes things visible. And if you hit the V key, it means we can move things around. So this is looking kind of interesting. Why don't we take this girl here, and we're going to drop her into this largest area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag her just above that layer there. And you'll see that she's sitting above that layer. So I need her to fill inside that box there. And the way to do that is to hit the Option key, and that would be Alt on Windows, and go between the 2 layers. You'll now see this little icon. So if I click, what it will do is it will clip that inside that layer now. So if we have a look in here, we can see here's our photograph now. It's going to fit within that box. So I don't know, somehow we got 2 copies of it there by accident. So there we go. Notice that this is now fitting within that box, which means that if I select the box down here and I move it, it's actually constrained inside there. So that's kind of neat. And if we want, we can reposition it in there for a better positioning. We could scale it. We could do different things. So that's basically called a clipping mask. So let's go down and do some other things here. I'm going to grab another one here. I'm going to grab this one here, and I'm going to put this one inside the other box. So I'm going to drag this down just above the box there, hit the Option key, click. And now that constrains it. Notice it's in there. So we can move this around to position if we want. Although I'm kind of looking at this and thinking, it might be better if her leaning in. So what if I decide to just drag her up to the top here, and I'm going to move over here, and there's two girls in there, and we decide we want to crop it in there. We could do that. Or I could hit Control T, once again, or Command T, and I can scale this down, and I can fit these two within the one. See what we're doing here? All we're doing is scaling within this box, and it's being constrained. So there's different things we could do there. I'm just going to hit Enter. That one might have actually worked better up there, but it doesn't matter. I think you get the general idea, and let's do one more. And so I'm going to take this guy here. I'm going to clip him inside the other box. So there we go. There's our guy there. And I'm just going to scale this down. And there's our, let me go to Command 0, because this is still pretty huge. It's a lot bigger. So we can move that around. Notice how it appears inside there. So I'm just going to scale that down to about there. Hit Enter. And we're going to go back. So there we go. We're able to use these reusable templates. So at any time, we can start just dropping new photographs in here and creating new layouts. We could create different shaped boxes if we wanted, and also change them up. Now, here's one of the things that I just really love doing, and a lot of photographers love doing in Photoshop, is let me just go all the way back. I'll show you what we've done. All I did is I created this background here. And you'll see there's some different things there. I used some textures and different things to create these kind of grungy effects. Then put some boxes in, use some brushes, custom brushes. So custom brushes and textures are just really, really useful in Photoshop. And it enables you to very quickly create some really cool and interesting looking layouts. And once again, if you pop them in here, they can be completely reusable if you decide to use them in a template. All right, well, let's look at some other things we can do. Let's open this up right now. I'm going to go back here. And let's do a sky replacement. I'm just going to grab these two images. And one of the big things is, really is working in layers. So what we want to do is select this background here. So there's a number of different ways of doing it. I'm going to grab the quick selection tool, and I'm just going to click and drag around here. And that's going to enable me to select that. Now, I've gone a little far there, so I'm just going to grab the Option key and just go back and just clean this up a little bit. And just gently clean that up. Now, I'm using a pressure-sensitive brush on here. So what's the advantage of that? The advantage of this pressure-sensitive brush is if I go up here, I can turn on pen pressure from my selection. So now I can go in here and get a better selection. So I'm actually just going to undo it from here. And I'm just going to roughly show you this. Let me just get in there. So I'm kind of getting a rough selection in there just using the selection tool. And what we can do is we can clean this up by simply hitting Refine Edge. And if we hit this Refine Edge option, this enables us to see a lot better what we're doing. So I'm just going to adjust this. And I'm just going to increase the radius. And when we do that, it kind of cleans it up a little bit. And I'm just going to output it to a selection. Because what I'm doing right now is I've selected the sky, but I want to select everything else. So Command-Shift-I will inverse that selection. Go back to Refine Edge now. And you can see what it's going to look like when we cut the background out. So we can clean up we can do feathering and all kinds of different things. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a new layer for layer mask. And there we go. We've cut out the background. And this works the same way for cutting out people and all that fun stuff that people love to do a lot. So what we're going to do now is we're going to grab a sky. And I'm going to click and drag to just drop this sky into this image. So here we go. We've now got this sitting here. And I'm going to drag it down underneath, and we can see now we've got our sky that we could play around with, and we could add a much more, dramatic background to this photo. So one of the things I'm going to do here, though, is I'm actually just going to fade it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer mask, and a layer mask is great. You can see I use these all the time because they're non-destructive. If I hit the Shift key, it will turn it off. We can paint in and out of these masks. We can do all kinds of different things. So right now I'm going to grab a gradient. And with the gradient tool, I can easily blend these together. And you'll notice there that's showing a radial. I want to make sure it's on a linear blend, foreground to background. And we're just going to go up here. And what I'm doing is I'm just fading this out a little bit. And I'm going to just fill it up with white behind it. So I created a new layer. And I'm just going to fill that layer of white. What am I doing that for? Because what I'm doing is I'm blending it. If you ever look at the sky and you see a real background of a real sky, you'll notice that as it goes towards the horizon, there's more atmosphere and stuff in there, and it will cause the, it'll kind of fade and be more white towards the horizon. So it just makes it look more natural, blending it in. So now we can do things called adjustment layers. Grabbing adjustment layers, we can adjust all of these. I can grab some curves if I want. And with the curves, I have complete control over all these different layers. I could do them independently or one at a time. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a little bit more contrast here, a little drama. And notice that I'm affecting all of these underneath at the same time. And by doing this, what it's doing is it's just giving me... Actually, let me just close out, get rid of that brushes panel because it makes things a little large. I'll just close that down. So what it's doing here is working in there. It's just giving us those adjustments. Now, if we want to just paint this curve adjustment in one place and not another, I can grab a brush. So if I grab a brush now, because notice that's white means it's having no effect. If I paint with black, notice I can lighten up those other areas. So what I'm going to do is I can actually, by using the brushes, I'm going to go up here. And I can increase the size of the brush. And I can have a hard or a soft brush. We can also look under the brushes panel, which of course is the one I just closed. Let's pop the brushes panel up here. And we can use different shape dynamics, meaning I'm using a pressure sensitive pen on here. So I can set the opacity to pen pressure now. And also the flow to pen pressure. And what that means is the harder I press, the more this is going to affect it, and the lighter I press, the less it's going to affect it. So now I can just begin to blend these in. So if I want this to be brighter up top, I can do that. And notice it's just kind of giving me a little bit more of a natural blend there with that sky, and it's just kind of looking, just blending it in a little better. There we go. And you can see that, so we can paint in those adjustments exactly where we want them to be, and it just creates a more convincing image now that the tones are starting to match more. One of the other things I love to do sometimes is put a little color effect, so I can just choose a solid color over here. I don't know, let's just grab this color right now, an orange. And if I change this to blend mode to color, only the color is going to come through. Let's make sure we're on color. And we drop the opacity all the way down, just give it a little tweak, and notice now we can start to give it this nice little color cast. You see there, before and after. Now it makes it look more a sunset. And also by doing that, it just kind of brings the different layers together a little bit more and makes it look more believable. So if we want to look at this, you know, this is what we had before, and this is what we had after. Just very, very quickly playing around. Well, what other things can we do? I'll show you something else which is really interesting if we're working on things like time lapse. If we choose File, Open, and then I've got a sequence of images here that I shot. And these were all shot about 10 seconds apart. I'm going to grab the first one and choose Image Sequence. And now it's going to know these are all together because the numbers increment by 1. So I'm going to click Open, choose a frame rate. Let's do 24 frames per second. Click OK. And let's look under the timeline. So we go under the window. We're going to open up our timeline now. And there's our timeline. And if I hit the space bar, you'll notice I've created a time lapse right there. And that's just very quickly done that from all those photographs. Notice how quickly and easily Photoshop is able to do that. All right, so I'm going to show you another thing here we're going to do. We're going to choose File, Open. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just a little bit of photo work here. And so here we go. We've got a photograph here. And what I want to do is I'm going to enhance this a little bit, and I'm going to make it look like we have water, like a water reflection here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get rid of this fire that's burning. So we've got these great content aware tools. One of them is the patch tool, which I'm just going to drag around this area. And if I want to add to that selection, hit the Shift key, because I do. I want to make sure I grab all the fire. Make sure I've changed the patch to content aware. And just click and drag this out into an area that looks pretty good to what we want. And there we go. It gets rid of it. Now, if you looked at this photo for the first time, you wouldn't know that this had been removed. Now, you can repatch it if you want to clean up some areas like here maybe, and you want to just kind of make it look a little different. You could do that, but I'm not going to bother. This is doing exactly what I needed to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create the reflection. So I'm going to make a selection across the top of the image. And this is where I want the water to go, about here. So I'm going to take this and reflect it. So Control J or Command J, and that copies that selection to a new layer. And I'm going to hit Control T for free transform. Right click, and we're going to flip this vertically. And now I'm just going to drag it down, holding down the Shift key to constrain it. And notice now that we've got a base here, which is kind of reflecting this. It looks okay, but we've got another step we need to make it look more convincing, and that's to add a little bit of a blur. So we just go Filter, and we've got all these filters, tons and tons of filters in here, but we're going to grab the Filter Blur. We're going to use the Motion Blur. Then with the Motion Blur, if we set it to horizontal, it's going to make it look like a river that's running. And vertical, we're going to get a little bit more of a glassy reflection here. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe tweak that distance a little bit. Click OK. And what I like to do for realism is drop the opacity down a little bit. See, we've got that stuff under there. Well, let's make it look like we've got water on there, but we can just kind of see through to what's underneath the water as well. It just adds an extra step of realism. There's other things we could do to it. Sometimes I like to take the color of the sky and reflect that in there a little bit and put some ripples and things like that in, which are easy to do. But I'm going to show you another thing. I'll show you how to do a little dodging and burning. So I'm just going to create a new layer, and I'm going to change this to overlay mode. I'm going to call this one dark. And I'm going to duplicate that, and we're going to call this one light. Now, there's a number of ways of dodging and burning. Sometimes people like to fill these with 50% gray if they're going to use the dodge and burn tools. But in this case, we're just going to use the brush tool. So I'm not really worried too much about the 50% gray because it wouldn't actually do anything here when we're painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a dark one. I've got my opacity turned to about 30%. And what I'm doing is I'm just darkening around these edges just by painting. And once again, I'm using a pressure sensitive brush. And all I'm doing is I'm just trying to draw a little more emphasis to our couple here and make them really look like the center of the photograph. So we're just kind of playing around with that and just kind of darkening that off a little bit. There we go. And at this point here, you know, we've got that there. That's a before and after. You could play around if you wanted with the opacity, if it felt like it was a little strong. You can do different things there. Let's grab the light. So now I'm going to grab a white brush by hitting the X key. And I'm just going to paint in here just to give it a little bit more, just lighten that area up as if there's just a lighting part right here. So the light's actually coming in and hitting them here, so to speak. And you can see if we look at this before and after, how we're really just changing the emphasis of that photograph. There's other things we could do. We could go into curves. If we want to do a curves adjustment just to kind of clean this up a little bit, let's pop our curves out a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab there. That'll drop it down. Let's grab the little finger. And if we click here now, it'll add a point on a curve. So we know, hey, this is the bright part that we really want to maybe play around with. We've got some midtones. I'm thinking, well, you know, some of our darker areas maybe over here. So we can kind of see where they are. So I'm going to take these darker areas now. I'm going to pull them down to darken them more. And I'm going to take in these bright areas, and I could brighten them up, or I could bring them down to balance them out a little bit, and I could open up those shadows. See how we can play different ways with these curves? And the other thing I love of curves is we can go into the colors. So we can literally go in here and we can change it now. If we want it more red or less red, which I prefer, we can grab that. We can grab the greens here. We can play around with those greens. And maybe the blues, because I feel like, you know, we want to give it a little bit more of an evening feel now. We can start to add those blues in there and, you know, just notice that. So here we go. There's the curves before and after. Notice how we've really changed the coloring. There's our dodging and burning. So let's go to our original photograph right there, and we'll turn our curves off. And then afterwards, we've gone there. So that's just a number of things that we can do here. There's so many more things we can do in Photoshop. Once you start working with layers, there's just a world of possibility of different things that you can do to your photographs. And I'm not even touching on retouching. If you want to do any high-end retouching, you really need Photoshop. You can't really do good solid retouching in Lightroom alone. So anyway, it gives you a little taste of what you can do in Photoshop for Lightroom users.